The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Florida Institute of CPA's CPE webinar. Today's program is entitled CPA Exam Changes and Florida Licensure. This webinar is on the importance of and changes to the CPA exam. Learn how these recent changes impact you now and what the exam will look like in the future. After the presentation, we will answer questions concerning the exam as well as CPA exam requirements for the state of Florida. My name is Adam Heventhal, e-learning manager for the Florida Institute of CPAs. I will be moderating for this webinar, which is scheduled to run from 2 p.m. to 3:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time. Now, before I introduce our speakers and we jump into today's program, there are a few housekeeping matters I need to cover. If you experience any technical difficulties or need any assistance, please contact GoToWebinar Support at 800-263-6317 or visit GoToWebinar Support on the web at support.citrixonline.com/GoToWebinar. If you have any questions or comments for the speakers, you can submit them using the question control panel located on the right side of your screen. You'll see an orange-colored arrow that will allow you to expand and contract the question control panel. A link to download a copy of today's PowerPoint was sent previously via email. The instructors will be showing these same materials on screen during the webinar. If you still need to download the materials, please log into the FICPA website, click My Account in the upper right-hand corner, then choose My eMaterials. There you'll find a PDF of today's PowerPoint slides. Our first speaker today is Deborah Curry, CEO and President of Florida Institute of CPAs. She is the FICPA's 5th CEO in the organization's 111-year history. Deborah is a certified public accountant in Florida, Georgia, and Texas. In addition, she holds the Chartered Global Management Accountant CGMA designation. Deborah worked with the Georgia Society of CPAs for 6 years, serving first as CFO, then as COO. A graduate of Texas A&M University, Deborah's previous experience includes finance positions with Turner Broadcasting System, Time Warner, and the Pacific USA Holdings Corporation. Our second speaker today will be Joseph Maslot. Joseph Maslot, CPA, CGMA, is the Senior Manager, Content Management with the AICPA Examinations Team, located in Ewing, New Jersey, since 2006. Mr. Maslot has over 15 years of accounting experience and began his career at PricewaterhouseCoopers. He then joined AT&T World Headquarters and E-Trade Financial in management positions in accounting. As a lead CPA in the AICPA examinations team, he has served in various roles, including staff liaison for the AUD subcommittee and business owner of simulation development and multiple choice question process reengineering. Mr. Maslot is currently leading the practice analysis, a research project designed to document the scope of entry-level practice as well as serve as the foundation for the exam's validity and legal defensibility. Mr. Maslot earned his BS in accounting from Bowling Green State University in 1999. Let's please welcome our speakers. Deborah, I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm thrilled that you're here with us today as we all learn together about the changes on the upcoming CPA exam, which is so important. And the first thing I would like to do is welcome each of you to reach out to the FICPA as your resource center. When you are working through the process of your education, going through the CPA exam, then obtaining your license, We are here to help serve you and help you through this process. And I know that our Student Initiatives Manager, Jennifer Allen, is always available to you and always there to answer your questions. And I'd like to also let all of the students on the call today know about the Educational Foundation and the scholarships that we provide to students in their 4th and 5th year of their accounting curriculum. The Educational Foundation during the year of 2016-17 will be awarding $125,000 in scholarships. And this is to help you get through your educational years, the 4th and 5th year, and then work through the process of taking the exam. The application process starts in January, and it's online. And by April, we announce and award the scholarships to the students so they can prepare for the next year. In addition, we have a great race that is called a 1040K race, and it's a 5K, and it's held in the Miami area every year in Coconut Grove. And this race is held in April of 2017, but we encourage you to join in the race because it does benefit students and provide scholarships for certain students that are in the Miami-Dade, the Monroe, Broward, and Palm Beach County areas. These are just some of the things that the FICPA does to try and help you through your education and then working through the process of taking the CPA exam, which I highly encourage and hope that you will all do. So with that, again, I urge you to reach out to Jennifer at any time that you have questions, and I thank you for supporting the FICPA and hope that you'll consider us to be your partner as you go through this process. And with that, I will turn it over to Joe at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. So today I'm going to go through the process that the AICPA and our stakeholders went through when we update the examination. So pursuant to our board's policy, we do a practice analysis at least every 7 years or sooner if it's required by the profession. As everyone has most likely heard, the next exam launches on April 1st, 2017, so it's coming up pretty quickly. I'll get into exactly what went behind the changes to the exam and the AICPA's involvement in those changes. So the research project is a large effort. We went through 3 main phases. We went through exploration, confirmation, and an exposure period. In our exploration phase, we did numerous interviews and focus groups with newly licensed CPAs and those who supervise newly licensed CPAs. And the purpose of that is really to glean what are the knowledge and skills needed by newly licensed CPAs. So that was done through or across many different parts of the profession. Our core research group was those in public accounting, but we also did interviews and focus groups with CPAs in business and industry, in academia, regulators, you name it. And from that, we developed at least the initial cut of what is out there publicly now, which is called the blueprints. And those blueprints are really the content and skills to be tested on the exam. So in order to validate what we came up with as far as the blueprints go, we did a survey, which was part of our confirmation phase. And the survey, which was in total some 600 tasks that a newly licensed CPA could be expected to do, they were sent on a sample basis to CPAs throughout the country. We sent the survey out to thousands and thousands of CPAs, and if they qualified, that is, if they worked directly with newly licensed CPAs, supervised their work, so on, they were asked to rate the frequency and criticality of those tasks. So that's really where the empirical data comes in to support the legal defensibility of the exam and to make sure that really we're testing the correct things. So after the survey, we took these task statements, which had a numerical value associated with them, and reviewed with our volunteer content subcommittees. And I'll get into exactly their role in a few slides. From there, later in 2015, we had a formal exposure draft where we put out the proposed changes for the exam. We received numerous comments from that, and those are reflected in the final report from the practice analysis, which is available online and was announced on in April of 2016. So really the main takeaway from the practice analysis was the robust blueprints. So these blueprints are, we believe, a level of detail more than is currently on our content specification outline. And further in this presentation, I'll go through exactly what I mean by that. So I mentioned that coming up with the blueprints, there was significant involvement by AICPA's volunteer subcommittees. So each section of the exam has a volunteer subcommittee. And one of their major duties is to review and approve content for each section. Additionally, this group helps set the blueprint for each section. So these groups, which generally are 9 to 11 individuals from all across the accounting profession, work on a detail level with all of our questions and our blueprints. So every multiple choice question or simulation that you see on the exam has been reviewed by this representative group. And these representative subcommittees for audit, BEC, FAR, and REG are under the purview of our content committee. The content committee, the state board committee, and the psychometric oversight committee are all a part of a senior committee from the AICPA, the Board of Examiners. The Board of Examiners oversees all things CPA exam. So the state board committee really focuses on the licensure angle of the CPA exam, which of course is the purpose, and making sure that any changes are appropriately communicated to those in each state. The psychometric oversight committee, a psychometrician is someone who specializes in mental measurement, and they make sure that what we come up with adheres to best standards in the testing industry, and that the exam is scored and valid. Going through the practice analysis, it's really important to realize where we draw the line for someone who's newly licensed. And newly licensed eligibility is not just about passing the CPA exam. There's an experience requirement, of course an education requirement, and in some states there's also an ethical requirement. All of those together equal CPA. So going through the practice analysis, really the line that we drew was someone who has the knowledge and skills typically possessed by a person with around 2 years experience. And that has been consistent through many iterations of the CPA exam. And that's really the level where someone is minimally competent. So when the states confer a license upon someone, that's really the line where they have the minimal level of experience to go out in the field and practice. Throughout the practice analysis and through our exposure process, where we received comments on the proposed changes to the exam, we have a lot of comments that, well, it wouldn't be fair to test someone on higher order tasks if they're still in school. So a lot of people, as I'm sure people are aware, take the exam either in school or right after school, or they don't have a lot of experience. But that really can affect how and where we draw the line for someone who's minimally competent. So it's around someone who has 2 years experience, but I'll get into exactly what we mean by testing higher order skills and how candidates and students can adequately prepare for those sort of questions. So the practice analysis, some of the accomplishments were really to make sure that we're testing the knowledge and skills that a newly licensed CPA would need. We have to focus on ensuring that the exam is valid and reliable, of course, and updating the exam in the future probably won't be as long as every 7 years. We're looking at ways to speed up the amount of iterations to the exam as necessary. So as data analytics or big data become a bigger part of what accountants do on a day-to-day basis, what CPAs do on a day-to-day basis, we hope to effect those changes to the exam in a little bit quicker manner than we have in the past. And that really requires the AICPA to work closely with state boards and the profession as a whole to make sure that the exam is always current and relevant. Aside from the blueprints, one of the biggest changes to the exam is really a shift from memorization to critical thinking. So going through all of our research, the focus groups, the survey, it's apparent that, of course, knowledge of audit, financial accounting, taxation, general business is the cornerstone to what a CPA does, and it's of the utmost importance. But just knowing facts isn't enough. You have to be able to apply those facts. And what does that mean for a newly licensed CPA? Well, it means solving problems. It means remaining skeptical, critical thinking, analyzing problems. And how does that usually get delivered to coworkers and clients? It's through communication skills. And by communication skills, I don't necessarily mean spoken word necessarily. It can come through in research, documentation, written portions, using spreadsheets, and that's really where our task-based simulations really come into play. So what you'll see generally, and I'm sure you've heard, is that there's a shift from away from multiple choice questions to testing more task-based simulations. I'll get into exactly what the breakout is for the next exam. What we did in the blueprints was really to tie all the tasks that a newly licensed CPA could be expected to do to a level. So not all things that a newly licensed CPA comes in contact with, they would need to be expert in. So really, the more complex an issue, probably a newly licensed CPA would probably be at the remember and understand. So if you're talking about stock-based compensation, it's a pretty complicated area with lots of associated literature and professional standards. We wouldn't expect a newly licensed CPA to be at the highest skill level, which is evaluation. We would expect a newly licensed CPA to be remember and understand. So they would, in the course of working on, say, stock-based compensation, be able to ask the right questions, identify certain issues, have a basic knowledge. Now, conversely, we would expect newly licensed CPAs to be at a very high skill level when it comes to more basic accounts, cash, accounts receivable, inventory, prepaids, and that's kind of what you'll see throughout our blueprint, the inverse relationship between kind of the skill level and the accounts tested. So what we did for each content area and each content task, we associated a skill level. So either remembering and understanding, application, analysis, evaluation. And beyond just associating a skill level, we also assigned a representative task, which is an example of how a newly licensed CPA would interact with a certain task at a certain skill level. I'll get into exactly what that means in a few slides. So some of the sample verbs that we use that associate with these skill levels, and you can kind of see this if you're looking at the blueprints, what exactly they are. So again, back to the example of stock-based compensation, we would expect a newly licensed CPAs to, be able to do basic definitions, recall, explain. And then if talking about inventory, if you're on a physical inventory, you might be the only CPA there. So you would have to be able to conclude, evaluate, make recommendations. So it's really geared to what a newly licensed CPA needs to do in the field. As you may have seen, we have a new task-based simulation that went live in the middle of 2016. It looks and feels similar to our task-based simulations that have been around since 2004. This one was, it's called document review simulation, and it's meant to more closely mimic how a professional would work with a document, or like a Word document, in track changes. So in this example, you can see that there's blue highlighted text. What the candidate is asked to do, when there's blue highlighted text, you would click, and you can see it drops down a set of options. And what you do is you click the best option, and that would essentially be your answer. And you can see here that really you can keep what was the original text. You could decide to delete the text, or you could change it to one of the options here. So in this case, you would need to jump to, there's a financial statements tab. You would have to look at the net revenue, calculate the change, calculate the corresponding percentage, and select the correct answer, which is indicated on the screen. Now, this example of a document review simulation is a full-length example, and it's available on our sample test at aicpa.org CPA exam for example purposes. You can go to this exact simulation and download and see how it interacts. And you can see it's not too much different than our current simulations, but what it will do is, if you decide to keep the text, delete it, or change it, it will auto-format, kind of akin to working in a Word document. Just like our other simulations, you have tools available to you. There's the authoritative literature, where if you wanted to do some research, you could certainly do that. This example has financial statements, which you need to consider to complete the task. Of course, there's help screens. There's a spreadsheet if you wanted to do your calculations there. There's calculators. You can split the screen. All the normal tools in a simulation are available there. Exam design. So the proposed changes to the exam that were announced as formal changes in April, how do they impact the design and structure of the exam? So as I mentioned, today, really the allocation of the exam from a skill perspective is heavily on remember and understand and application. And that's kind of evidenced by our item type distribution, which I'll get into in a bit. So generally it was about 50-50. In the future, and I hope this comes through on the presentation, you can see that there's a shift to more analysis and an evaluation task in audit. So all sections of the exam will have the analysis skill level. And for the first time, we're adding task-based simulations to the BEC section, which I'll get into in a few slides. But audit is the only section that has the evaluation skill level. And based on my inventory example before, it's really the purpose, of course, of the license in the audit space that we would expect someone to operate at this highest skill level. So someone who is on that physical inventory will likely need to wrap up and include that inventory to make sure that the inventory has been adequately counted, that the procedures were followed, and that's really where we expect a newly licensed CPA to work at that highest level. Again, it's only 5 to 15% of the audit section, so roughly a candidate would see 1, maybe 2 at most of the evaluation type questions. At the evaluation and analysis skill levels, those are almost entirely tested through task-based simulations. So as you know, today task-based simulations come in a few different varieties. We have research questions, we have, in BEC, we have essays. We have basic kind of drop-down lists where you select procedures or the correct answer, or you can have more of a spreadsheet type example where you're recording a journal entry or entering in calculations. So the 4 sections today, if you look at auditing, we have about 90 multiple choice questions which are weighted at 60% of a candidate score, and we have 7 task-based simulations which account for 40% of a candidate score. So that's today. Going forward, you can see there's less multiple choice questions, and associated they're worth a little bit less, meaning they're weighted a little bit less. So the next version of the exam for audit, you'll see that there are 72 multiple choice questions weighted at half of your score, and then the number and the weight of task-based simulations increases. So in the audit section, you'll see around or up to 9 task-based simulations, and that could include, like I mentioned, 1 or 2 evaluation type task-based simulations. So you're in audit, you're going to see at least 1 research question, and you're going to see other types of task-based simulations, including the document review simulation, which is or can be tested in any of our 4 sections. Jumping down to BEC, you can see that written responses make up the same number and corresponding weight on the next exam. So written responses haven't changed. They're only tested in the BEC section. You can see that for the first time, BEC has task-based simulations. A candidate can expect to see about 5 task-based simulations weighted at 35%. And you can see the multiple choice questions decreased in number and weight for BEC. Really the only section where multiple choice questions increased was the regulation section. So they have about the same number of multiple choice questions weighted at 50%, and you can see regulation, financial accounting and reporting, and auditing have 9 task-based simulations each, all again at that 50% weight category. And in any of the sections, aside from BEC, you could find a research question. I mentioned earlier that really the biggest improvement for candidates and educators is the detailed blueprints. So what I have on screen is an example of the auditing and attestation section, which breaks down each content area, the associated weight, and then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the skill allocation, where you can see evaluation is at that 5 to 15% weight. So auditing still has, and it's meant to be structured on the course of an engagement, whether that engagement is an audit, attestation, or accounting and review services engagement. You have the ethics, professional responsibilities, and general principles. Then you get into assessing risk and planning. Really the meat of this section, of course, is performing audit procedures and obtaining evidence. And then you have forming conclusions and reporting. So I'm going to get an example of kind of how the blueprint works, and what we have here is really the heart of the audit blueprint, which is area 3, which is performing procedures and obtaining evidence. So it might be a little hard to see, but we're looking at, I'm going to show an example of how the tasks assign up to a skill level. So you can see we're in audit. Understanding sufficient appropriate evidence is obviously a crucial task for any auditor. So thinking about that, you can understand why it's at our highest skill level. So it's going to be tested at the evaluation skill level, which means it will be tested via task-based simulations. And really the representative task here is conclude on the sufficiency and appropriateness of evidence obtained during an engagement of an issuer or non-issuer. So that is, it's fairly broad, but it gives an idea of you're really looking at pieces of evidence. So if if you're in, say, again, the physical inventory observation example, you might be looking at test counts or procedures, and based on the question at hand, you'd be asked to, okay, is this sufficient and appropriate? So it's really at that highest level. I want to draw attention to the analytical procedures and the difference in the care that we put into this version of the blueprint compared to our past content specification outline. So if you went to our current content specification outline and said, okay, during substantive procedures, what do you do with analytical procedures? Well, the current outline only says analytical procedures. It doesn't say anything else. And really what the next version of the exam does, it ties that to a skill level and then a representative task of how a newly licensed CPA would be expected to perform in that skill level. So you can see that there's 6 examples here. And really this permeates the entire blueprint, where a certain content group or topic is associated to a skill and then a representative task. So across all 4 sections, there's nearly 600 representative tasks. And the reason for this was really to help demystify what's on the exam, provide a little bit more clarity to what we're testing and how we're testing it. So, you know, if someone is not taking a review course, you know, this gives them a lot more information that was on the exam in the past. Testing time and breaks. So for the first time, we're adding a formalized break that doesn't count toward or doesn't count against testing time. So about halfway through each section, a candidate will be offered a standardized 15-minute break. Now, a candidate can either accept this or decline it and keep working on the exam. If you accept it, the exam closes down, you get up, you have to go through all of the procedures that you would have to normally go through at a pro exam center when you get up from your test station and take a break. So really that came about because we're testing higher order skills. We were actually, in ProMetrics Network, the only high stakes exam that didn't offer a formalized break. So this is really to give candidates a chance to regroup, take a step back, get back in the exam, and finish up. Believe it or not, the purpose of the exam is really not to see how much you can do within 4 hours. It's meant to be presented as, we think this is really a reasonable amount of questions to complete in the time, and we want to see what you know. If we wanted to create the test to really see how much someone can get through, we could create a test like that, but it's not structured that way. So we think that 4 hours for each section for a total of 16 hours is a reasonable amount of time for a newly licensed CPA to complete the exam. So that being said, an hour was added each to the BEC section and to the reg section, and that's really to allow for the testing of higher order skills and to introduce testing of task-based simulations in BEC. So what can you expect when you launch a certain section of the exam? So we'll walk through audit as an example. So just like in the past, our multiple choice questions will be routed based on how you do on each testlet. So if you land in testlet 1 on audit, you go through 36 multiple choice questions. Depending on how you do on that, you'll get a hard testlet or a medium testlet for your, in testlet number 2 for your next 36 multiple choice questions. Really all that impacts is the weight of associated or the value of associated multiple choice questions. So in a difficult testlet, you would theoretically have to get less MCQs correct because they're worth a little bit more because they're a little bit harder. But in either path, you can pass. Once you land in our task-based simulations, there is no routing. So depending on what panel you get what you get, and you go through them. So You land in testlet 1, you get 36 multiple choice questions. Once you move on from that testlet, you can't go back, but once you're in the testlet, as you know today, you can kind of move between questions, you can work backwards, forwards, mark items as you wish. But once you move between testlets, you can't go back. So you would land on your second testlet, complete that. And in between any testlet, you could take an optional break, which would count against testing time. The standardized break is offered after the third testlet. So in audit, you complete those 2 TBS that are in testlet 3, and you can either take the standardized break or continue onto testlet 4. You can the standardized break, as you can see from the visual, won't be offered again. Again, you can always take optional breaks, and that's been standard since the exam was computerized, but that does count against testing time. Exam administration. So, in anticipation of the exam changing, anytime we change the exam, logically you have folks trying to rush in to take the exam prior to it changing, the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And to accommodate this, we added 40 additional testing days, and that started in the second quarter of 2016. So you can see we go 10 days into each blackout month. So in September, we just concluded that additional 10 days. So it's 40 more testing days during the year. We heard during the practice analysis a lot, why can't we test all in the month of June? That would be a pretty seismic shift for us. So it'd probably take longer to do that than it, it wouldn't allow folks, we wouldn't be able to get that implemented for a couple years. So in the meantime, as we look at how can we expand testing so that everyone can make sure that they test when they want to, well, we were able to add 40 days this year. There's a note here. The 10-day will not be available for the launch of the next exam, and that's the second quarter of 2017, and I'll get into exactly why that is. Next slide. So what we have to go through on whenever we launch a new exam is standard setting, and that really has to do with recalibrating all of the items. We have to make sure that given that the mix of items has changed, the test list has changed, they're performing adequately. And to do this, we need to hold scores for 10 weeks. So if you take the testing window in the second quarter of 2017, anytime between April 1 and May 31st, you won't be able to get your scores until about August. And we realize it's a big disruption, but it's extremely important that the scores that we send out, of course, are accurate and reliable. So that will be a minor disruption in the long run to folks. The good news is, starting in the third quarter of 2017, we can get back to around the average 20-day score release, which is currently what the timeline that if you were taking the exam today. So good news is, in the long run, we'll get back to that 20-day. Beware if you're taking in 2017, the second quarter, because we will be holding scores for 10 weeks. So if you are bumping up against the 18-month timeline to finish all exams, we encourage that you reach out to your state board, let them know the situation you're in, and we hope that as we try to communicate this, that the state boards can help you in that endeavor. I hope this doesn't impact too many folks. A lot of questions we also get on transition. So a candidate can pass any combination of the current exam and the next exam to qualify for licensure. So if you pass audit and financial accounting and reporting prior to the second quarter of 17, you do not have to retake those sections again. So I imagine it would behoove a lot of folks to take BEC prior to the inclusion of task-based simulations and an additional hour to allow for that, and the same with reg. So again, as the sections aren't really, the sections are not changing, the transition is pretty simple. So any combination of the current and next versions of exam qualify you for the licensure process. Exam fee. The exam will cost a little more in April of 2017, and that's a direct correlation to the extra hour of testing time for BEC and reg. It is expected to be around $20, which directly correlates to what ProExam charges, Prometric charges for an hour of seat time. Because different states have different fees and such, reach out to your state board to see how much that will increase in 2017. So beyond the launch. In 2018, and we don't have a quarter just yet, but sometime in 2018, we're looking to update the graphical user interface or the candidate experience of the exam. Currently, we're still using the interface from 2004, which is, like a reliable car, an older reliable car, which it can get you where you're going. It doesn't impact you, but it's not as new. It's old looking, so it's time that we refresh the experience. And really, we're kind of falling. We want to make sure we keep in step with Prometric. They have the 23-inch HD monitors in their testing centers. Our current software doesn't allow us to take advantage of all of that space, but the exam in 2018 and the new software driver technology will allow us to use all of the monitors, which are great. It'll have the modern design. As you know, in 2004, that predates iPhones, iPads, all of that. So a refresh of the exam interface is in order. Additionally, the new software allow us to be Enhanced Americans with Disabilities Act support. So folks who would need screen readers or assistant technology will find it a little easier in 2018. Another addition when the new software is pushed out in 2018, we'll be adding Microsoft Excel. And Microsoft Excel will be added as a tool, and that is a tool to replace the current generic spreadsheet, which based on our research, candidates really don't use, and it's really because it's not like current Microsoft Excel. So we're replacing that generic spreadsheet with Excel in 2018 when the supporting software is available. And again, we won't be directly testing Excel skills. You won't need to exhibit your proficiency in pivot tables or lookups or any advanced functions. But in the future, I think we could potentially see more of that come onto the exam, but starting in 18, we won't be directly testing Excel skills. Future candidate assessment for versions of the exam coming down the road, we're looking into better testing professional skepticism and judgment in our audit simulations. So in the future, you could potentially see videos, listening skills, more data analytics now that we have Excel in the exam. We're also looking at a way to better test written communication. One of the reasons why the written communication has stayed in BEC for the next version of the exam and at the same number and weight is because there's really not a great way for us to test the essay using automated scoring, which we currently do now. So there was really no reason to change it. We're looking at ways to expand writing on the exam, but that's future work, and that's something that's coming down the road. Future exams plans, again, looking into how audit data analytics really impacts the profession as CPAs become more and more reliant on technology. How does that impact the exam? That's another long-term initiative similar to the automated essay scoring. So all of this information, and it was a fire hose of information, the exam blueprints, the sample test, the final report from the practice analysis, frequently asked questions, they're all on aicpa.org/next-CPA exam. We're also doing, in partnership with NASBA, what to expect from the next CPA exam. We're doing a live webcast this November. You can register at the URL on the screen here. Myself and Pat Hartman from NASBA will be presenting with a live studio audience and asking questions and all that you need to know for the next version of the exam. Thank you much, and I'll turn it over to Rich.
Thanks, Joe. We would like to introduce Rich Evans. Rich Evans is the Examination and Licensing Supervisor of the Florida Division of Certified Public Accounting. He graduated magna cum laude with a bachelor's degree in organizational management and a master's degree in business administration from the Forbes School of Business at Ashford University in Clinton, Iowa. Over the last decade, he has also served the citizens of Florida as a sergeant for the Florida Department of Corrections, has filled the role of operations manager, managing partner in the private industry, and has taught at the college level as a business and accounting instructor. His focus on community collaboration has led him to a number of volunteer opportunities and community roles, some of which include sitting as a board member on the City of Bellevue's Code Enforcement Board and sitting as a board member on Rasmussen College's Business Advisory Board. Rich and Joe will now answer questions that anyone may have about the CPA exam or requirements for the state of Florida to sit for the exam.
Thank you so much. This is Richard Evans, and I'm glad to be here today. I've been asked to come into the webinar to see if there's any questions that we can bring some clarity for regarding sitting for the CPA exam.
I don't have any questions at the moment. Rich, would you care to talk about the requirements for the exam briefly, especially with the business law?
Absolutely. So sitting for the exam is not a very complicated process to navigate, but it is something that you should think through. The rule has a couple different types of layers that are occurring inside of it, and the rule I'm talking about is Florida Administrative Code 61H1, Section 27. And so inside of this rule, we have first a total hour requirement, but not a degree requirement. So if one wanted to sit for the CPA exam, they must have at least 120 semester hours of college work finished. The degree does not have to be conferred. As we were listening through the exam presentation, earlier on we heard that some people are taking the exam while they're still in school, and that is something that you can do here in this jurisdiction in Florida. Once you've completed the 120 hours, there are some content requirements, and if those are satisfied, then we can move you through the exam process. So the first layer is that 120 semester hours. Inside of that, we have two different types of content area that we're looking at when people apply. The first content area is about accounting. So we're looking at accounting. And here at the State Board Office, we actually evaluate your college transcript on a course-by-course basis. And we also consider how the individual universities are classifying these courses. And then within those guidelines, we have administrative rules that tell us what types of courses are acceptable versus what types of courses are not. So the first thing we have to understand, I guess, is what types of courses are not acceptable when we're talking about accounting. Inside of your content area to sit for the exam, you need those 24 semester hours. So you have a total of 120. Within that, there's 24 accounting hours. Those accounting hours have to be at the upper division level, and they have to be beyond the principal and elementary level. And so a good way for a candidate to define what that's talking about is anything that is at the intermediate 1 level and above and is offered at the junior level at the college and above. So if you took, let's say, an intermediate 1 class at a community college, the rule says it must be upper division is junior level, so even though the course might be substantially equivalent to what you might see over at the state university, because it doesn't satisfy the requirement of the rule in that it is a sophomore class, it would not count toward your requirement. So inside of that area, you normally have Principles of Accounting 1, Principles of Accounting 2. We see Principles of Financial Reporting or Introductory Financial Reporting or classes along that level. We also see Managerial Accounting, which most Floridians at state universities take as a sophomore. Sometimes we see that course being offered, obviously, as a 5th-year course in an MBA program, but it's important to understand that the content of that course is still something lower than what you would experience in intermediate accounting. So we have those 24 hours at the upper division level. Those elementary style courses can't count. And inside of that, you have to have some coverage in financial accounting. And a good way to do that, of course, is to take intermediate 1, 2, or 3, or any sort of financial analysis class, international accounting, government not-for-profit. All of these seem to fall into that process for us. You have to have coverage in tax. One of the common ways that students do it here in Florida is they take Income Tax 1, the 4001 course. You have to have coverage in auditing, and obviously any auditing and attestation course is going to satisfy that requirement so long as it is above the junior level. And you have to have coverage in cost accounting. This is the one that gets really tricky for folks in that cost accounting and managerial accounting are 2 words that are used inside of that rule. But the board does have a different approach to a managerial course, like I was just discussing with the MBA class and the sophomore class. So you would want to see a true cost element within a managerial course, which is to say that sometimes we do approve them. So what we'll do is we'll look at that course and see what types of prerequisites that course has. And it's pretty standard for a cost analysis course to have intermediate 1 as a requirement. So if you're looking at a managerial course and it doesn't have a prerequisite, or it's a principal class, it's very unlikely that that course is going to satisfy the cost accounting requirement. And then, of course, there's the most important class that we see that comes across our desk a lot is the accounting information systems. And the board is very clear on this matter. Accounting information systems, when it comes to the examination and licensure requirements, is an actual accounting class. So we see this deficiency come up quite a bit, especially if a student has studied at another university in another state, and they'll ask if they can get credit for a management information systems course. And management information systems and accounting systems are similar but significantly different in that there is this large accounting component to the AIS course. So you have your 120 total hours, no degree required, and then within it you have the 24 hours of upper division courses above the principal level and elementary level with the tax class and the audit class and the cost class and the financial accounting class and the accounting information systems class. And then on the other side you have what was just talked about a moment ago, you have a general business component requirement. Now the business rule is also persnickety in the navigation in that it has a content requirement and then it has an upper division requirement but then it actually has some exceptions. And the exceptions to the general business requirement are very important to know. So like the accounting side for the examination, you do have 24 hours required on the general business side. So going back to the top, we have 120 total hours, 24 in accounting, upper division, those content areas we discussed, and then we have 24 over in general business. Now in general business, we only have one real content requirement, and that's going to be business law. So if you studied, say, finance excessively or marketing or any of those types of courses, that's perfectly fine. You can take as many as you like. We don't particularly require a finance course. We don't require a marketing course, but we just require those 24 hours. Now, that business law has actually changed. Up until July of this year, the requirement was 6 semester hours, and those 6 semester hours, 3 of which had to be at the upper division, which is kind of like what we were talking about in accounting, which means it was a junior class or above. And then you had this content requirement inside of the business law that said that you had to have coverage of contracts and torts and uniform commercial code. And over the period of this year, the Education Committee, which is a committee that's assigned to my section, and the Board of Accountancy itself has been really evaluating the business law component of the education rule. And the Education Committee had made some recommendations earlier this year that they didn't think it was quite necessary that the business law course had to be upper division, and that they saw during the meeting, they saw that an upper division business law 1 versus a sophomore business law 1 were duplicative in nature. So if someone took both classes, they would only get credit for one. And so eventually it came to the point where the board had created an amendment to the rule saying, okay, 3 semester hours of business law, and there is no upper division requirement, which means you could take it as a freshman or as a sophomore or as a junior or senior or even in your 5th year, with coverage of the contracts, the torts, and the Uniform Commercial Code. And so that came back over to us, and we had to determine exactly how we would implement such a rule. And so we began looking at the other jurisdictions throughout the United States and how they look at their business requirement, or more importantly, those jurisdictions that have business law. And we found that in general, 99 out of 100 times, a person who has taken a traditional business law course, a traditional being something different than an industry specialization course, which would be like an insurance law course or a real estate law course. These are different. But somebody who had taken a business law 1 course or a legal environment of business course would have been exposed to coverage of contracts, torts, and at the minimum sales with regards to a Uniform Commercial Code. So when we're seeing people coming from the universities here in Florida now, and they have taken a Business Law 1 course, or they have taken a Legal Environment of Business course, and they have completed 3 semester hours in that course and credit was awarded, we're seeing that as satisfying the requirement of the new rule here at the board office. And so at that point, the applicant only needs to have those 24 hours with that particular course in there. And so going again over the education rule with regards to examination, you have the 120 hours up there, no degree requirement, 24 of which have to be in upper division accounting above the principal level, with accounting information systems and tax and audit and cost accounting and financial accounting, and then 24 hours of general business in which the business law component has to be at least 3 semester hours and has to have coverage of contracts, torts, and UCC, so a business law 1 or a legal environment. So that's how the education rule works. Now, are there some exceptions inside of the education rule? There are, actually, relating to business law, or not business law, general business. In general business, the rule has an exception clause for lower division courses. So some of those courses are microeconomics, macroeconomics. So if you take micro or macro as a first year, second year student, we can count those toward your general business requirement. We can also do the same thing with an introductory computer class, and we see quite a few of those types of courses that are coming out of the first and second year for students. And we can also do the same thing for introductory statistics. There is a restriction on the total number of hours that can be given for statistics at 6, but 3 of those hours can be at the introductory level. And the board has also allowed for lower division business communication courses. And so that one right there, I want to be very careful on how I tell you that course or courses, because there's no restriction there, but that course has to be a business course offered in the School of Business from the college. So if you took like an English, an ENC business communication course, it's not going to be something that we're automatically going to count. We're going to set that course aside and look for something from the business college, which brings us to the next part of the conversation. What do you do if you have taken industry specialization courses that are not offered through the School of Business at your university? So let's say you took some hospitality management courses, like a hospitality organizational behavior course or something along those lines. There is also another path for those courses to satisfy your general business requirement. What you would have to do, and the board has allowed this, is you would have the chairman of the accounting department at the university that you're attending write us a letter over here to the Division of Certified Public Accounting advising us of the equivalency. Just simply telling us, look, this particular class is equivalent to this particular class that is offered within the School of Business. And then there will be no further escalations on our part. We will accept that letter, index it into your application, and give you credit in your education requirement. So that's the business side of things, that's the accounting side of things, and the overall education requirement in order to sit for the exam. There are some other components, though, too. I guess since we're talking about the exam, there is a background requirement. Every applicant must be of good moral character. And so the board has given us some basic instructions on things that we can approve here at the board office. And then there are things that have to be escalated to the Board of Accountancy each and every time. And so it might be helpful, I think, to tell you some of those things just in case you're substantially affected by an arrest record of sorts. But if you had a misdemeanor and that misdemeanor was more than 10 years ago, and it's been resolved with all of the sanctions being satisfied, which simply means, let's say they give you a fine or probation or any of those types of things. If all the sanctions have been satisfied, the board has allowed staff to automatically approve that application, so long as it's only one incident. If there's more than one incident, we're going to send it over to the board just so that they can review it and make a decision on their own. Traffic offenses that did not result in injury or property damage, things like speeding or running a red light or failing to yield, staff can approve. Now, that's different than a traffic offense that is a criminal act, like a DUI or a reckless driving or something like that. There's a different way that we look at those. If you're driving on a suspended driver's license and your license was revoked or canceled or delinquent, we're allowed to approve a single offense of something like that happening within the last 10 years. And so it's important, as I go over these, it's important that you list these on your application, because if this applies to you and you don't list it and then we find out about it, because we will check your criminal record, it is going to create some circumstances for you that are not going to be very fun to experience. The board is going to want to talk to you, and the board is going to want you to explain to them why you said no to something when the answer was obviously yes. Possession of a fake identification. This is another thing that the board has allowed us to approve in the past, as long as it's a single incident. We've seen people in college try to use their friend's ID, and the board is just familiar with how these things happen, and they're very understanding. So it's important to be honest. Underage drinking, if it's a single offense, it's not something that you should worry is going to completely destroy your life. We have the ability to move forward here. Animal control issues. Those things come up, and every now and then a boat registration issue, again, if it's a single offense, it's something we can work with. Open container, public intoxication, some forms of disorderly conduct, trespassing even. If it's something like an insufficient funds issue, like you wrote a bad check at some point in your life, unfortunately we can't approve that at the staff level. Even if it was just for $5, it's going to go to the board for review. And things like public nuisance. Any types of felonies are going to go automatically, and any of the types of things I was just talking about there, if there are more than one offense, are going to go automatically. But just because something's going to the board does not necessarily mean that the board is not going to approve your application. In fact, I recently did a report for the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House, and for the Governor's Office, and we only had a handful over the last 4 years, and I can't remember, it was either 6 or 7, but only a handful of people that were not approved after having applied to us because of their criminal convictions. And in those circumstances, I believe, if I recall, some of them were because they intentionally said no on the application. So when it comes time to apply for the examination, you have those 120 hours complete. You have those 24 hours in upper division accounting with those 5 content areas. You've got the 24 hours in business with the business law requirement. You can make those exceptions for those lower division. You fill out the application, you answer those background questions honestly, and you send it over to us with the $50. Normally within 10 days, we've approved you. And normally within 2 days, NASPA will begin the process of issuing your jurisdiction ID so that you can schedule your exams and start moving forward to your license. Any questions?
We've had 1 or 2 come in, but it looks like you've already addressed most of them. Oh, just got another one. One moment.
Okay.
There you go. I just sent that over to you.
Okay, I see the question is, are Intro to Financial and Managerial Accounting courses considered as components of the General Business Division? Thanks. Well, that's a great question, and thanks for asking it. At the most recent Education Committee meeting, for those of you that are not familiar with the Education Committee, we have a committee that is made up of PhDs from state universities throughout the state of Florida, and they evaluate coursework that board staff find questionable or coursework that universities are asking for approval in advance so that they can offer to their students. And during that time, we had a discussion period in which, during discussion, the executive director of the board can make comments and the examination and licensing supervisor can make comments. And one of the comments that I discussed was the idea of allowing for Principle 1, Principle 2, Managerial Accounting coursework, these introductory financial courseworks, to be counted toward business. I know that Dr. Finema, the chairman of the Education Committee, left the Education Committee with the task of considering how that would work, and they also asked board staff if we could look into the other jurisdictions throughout the United States to see if there were other jurisdictions that were allowing those courses to count toward general business. And so at this point we are in that research phase where we're trying to determine if we do have other jurisdictions that are allowing this, if there are other jurisdictions that are prohibiting this, and then when we come back together for the committee meeting in December, we will continue those discussions, and it's my hope that eventually they may consider voting on such an idea and sending it over to the board for consideration. But at this point, the answer is no, but we are in talks, and we are very hopeful that that sort of thing may be available. It does require a change in administrative code, so no matter what the committee decides, eventually it is going to be something that the Board of Accountancy is going to have to decide.
Okay, I don't have any other questions today. Joe or Rich, do either of you have anything else you would like to share before we end today's webinar?
Well, I have one other thing I'd like to say. I'd like to wish everybody the very best of luck in their academic studies and in the application process and in the examination process. We have a CPA board website, which is myfloridalicense.com/DBPR/CPA. We have a series of frequently asked questions out there for people to look at. We also have a CPA email address, which is cpa.applications, that's plural with an S, at myfloridalicense.com. And just like Ms. Curry, I'd like to remind everybody that we also have an annual scholarship, the Clay Ford Minority Scholarship. We give away $200,000 every year. The deadline to apply for the Minority Scholarship is June 1st. This year, we did award the entire $200,000, with the average award per semester being $3,030. That application, of course, is available on our website at all. So I'd like to thank everybody for having me here.
This is Joe. Thanks for having me. Good luck. And remember to visit with any questions on the exam or the process of the practice analysis, aicpa.org, and the CPA exam page. Thank you.
And this is Deborah Curry, and again, thank you all for joining us. And I do hope that you'll reach out for anything that you might need. We're here to help, and certainly wish you luck on everything that you're going to be doing, and good luck with the exam.
Thank you, Deborah. Joe and Rich, we had 2 questions come in at the last moment. Do you care to respond to those before we end?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
One question was, if you fail a section, how long is the wait to retake?
Well, that would certainly not be a question for the state board. I don't know whether or not there is a restriction on how long they have to wait before they retake this section.
I can handle that one, Rich, if you like.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. You cannot take the same section in the same testing window, so you have to wait until the next testing window. So if you took that exam and failed in the first quarter of 2016, you wouldn't have been able to take it again until the second quarter of 2016. And then the other question was, would you say that the next exam is considered harder than the current exam? I wouldn't say harder. I would just say different. I think the mix of skills favors folks who aren't just getting by in memorization. I think there's just, the higher order task-based simulations. If you need to look something up in the authoritative literature, you can certainly do that. I think it'll benefit folks who are able to think through problems rather than just recall sort of basic facts.
All right, well, thank you.
Sure.
That wraps up today's webinar. I want to thank everyone for your participation today. If you have any individual questions for the instructors or the presenters that didn't get answered today, feel free to contact FICPA via email or phone. The contact information can be found at the end of the easy materials. If you're interested in other student programs, please visit the FICPA website at www.ficpa.org/students. Once again, on behalf of the Florida Institute of CPAs, we want to thank our presenters, Deborah Curry, Joe Maslott, and Rich Evans. Additionally, thank you to our attendees for your participation made today's event possible. This now concludes our program.